Hi, this is Steve Behrman, and welcome to Signs of the Upwising. The Great Upwising is a playful and yet pertinent term I use to describe a rapidly maturing body politic awakening beyond woke and anti-woke. When we see that we're really all on the same side and that we can turn our mutually destructive political tug of war into a mutually beneficial tug of peace, where we all pull together in the same direction. Now, the Sons of the Upwising podcast is designed to point out the islands of awakened sanity and help this movement without a name gain traction and momentum. Well, our guest today, Glenn Aparicio Parry, is an educator, ecopsychologist, author, pioneer in the dialogue between indigenous wisdom and contemporary thought. He's the founder of the Seed Institute and the Circles for Original Thinking. We could use some of that. And has spent decades bringing Native elders, scientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders into conversations exploring humanity's relationship with nature, consciousness, and culture. He's the award-winning author of Original Thinking and Original Politics, and his newest book is Original Love, the Timeless Source of Wholeness, and that completes his original trilogy. I can't wait to talk about Original Love. Glenn, it seems like we've been hearing about love for lifetimes. All you need is love. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. Jesus loves you. What's going on? Everything that seems to be the opposite is in our face. So, Glenn, welcome. And to start things off, tell us about original love and how do we bring it to bear at a time when we really seem to need it?
Wow. Well, I'd have to quarrel with the Beatles, all you need is love. So, because I spoke about how in the book, we also need respect, kinship. There's love by itself in a vacuum is a little bit, it's ripe for abuse, actually. So, there've been proselytizers that come into other lands and say, we're all about love, but we're going to take away your language. We're going to take away your homeland, but we're very loving. So,
We've
you know,
seen
so
we've seen that happen a lot in
we've seen that happen
indigenous
a lot.
cultures and doctrine of
That's
discovery and all of that sort of thing.
That's right. That's right. Well, this book, this book has its own origin story, which is unique because it was 8 years ago that my wife Tomoko, and then we were married for 30 years already, but we're coming up on our 38th wedding anniversary in 2 days, actually. So the July 31st.
Yeah.
So it was then that Tomoko one morning, just out of the blue, just pronounces my future and says, "You're going to write a book called Original Love." And she had never predicted my future, not that kind of specific. Maybe she predicted I think you should take out the garbage day, something, I don't know, something, but not like that. Nothing that important before. And I knew it was important, so I took out a computer and I started a folder on Original Love. But I was writing original politics then, as you may know, and then about a year and a half later, I was in Taos, New Mexico. I was talking to a woman named Jean Ellis Sankari, and she was asking me if I wanted to teach at UNM Taos, where she did. But she interrupts herself in the middle of a sentence and says, "I just got to download. You're going to write a book called Original Love, and it's going to be the third in a three-part series with original in the title." And that was the first time I knew I was writing a trilogy, because, and the funny thing about the story was that I had changed the title from Original Politics to Sacred Politics. I think I was thinking of Charles Eisenstein, who'd written
Sure.
Sacred Economics. I
Yeah.
thought, oh, that's a good title, but then, when she said that, I obviously knew I had to change it back and tell the publisher that we need to change the title, which in theory, after you sign a contract, they control the title. But I've never had an issue with that. I've never had an issue with any publisher. If you really don't want something, they don't want the author to be unhappy. So you need to be assertive in certain cases. So I said we have to change the title back. Actually, they put up no resistance whatsoever, and they said sure, and then everything flowed better, including the book Original Politics. I connected that to the first book. And Original Politics ends with love, because at that point I knew two things. One, the only way out of politics was love. You know, love is like, it's like a river or something, or, you know, it takes in whatever comes in its banks. So it is able to dissolve difference, you know, and that's really useful in the political realm, you know, at times. And also, you need to respect the integrity of the difference. So that's another thing that I might say. But so the book ends with love, and then original love. I got my own download for how to write it after I realized I had to change the title. And I realized then that it would be a book primarily about a remembrance for Mother Earth rather than a book that is about romantic love. But I don't exclude romantic love. In fact, I tell the story of Psyche and Eros in the book, which is considered by many to be a very romantic story. But it's more than that, actually. You know, dear Jean Houston, who just died 3 months ago, almost exactly, May 16th, she said that the story of Psyche and Eros was the guiding story for our times. And while I didn't discuss this with her, I think it could be in part because the story of Psyche and Eros, after Psyche gets separated from Eros and she's very distraught, she is assigned four tasks by Aphrodite. I took poetic license and called them the four labors of love. And those labors of love are all solved by involvement of the natural world, the fullness of the natural world. The first one, she had to separate a giant pile of seeds in an appointed hour, and it's ants. She prays, an ant nation comes. Ants separate the pile of seeds. In the second one, she's supposed to gather the fleece from battering rams down by the river, and she doesn't know how she's going to do that until a reed comes out from the river and tells her exactly what she must do. She must go in the dark of night and gather the fleece from the bushes and trees that the rams had brushed against, you know, and then the third thing, she's supposed to gather the waters of life from the top of the mountain that flow all the way into the underworld. And she can't get there. Those waters of life are guarded by dragons. There's no way she can do this. But she prayed, and Zeus sent an eagle. An eagle became her ally. And in the fourth one, it's a tower that tells her exactly what to do. So in every case, there is an intervention in. To me, it's very similar to indigenous stories that also talk about, like you could talk about the Blackfoot story of Scarface, and he meets a lot of allies along the way. This is so common, and so I think it's a very, very old story, but I agree with Gene Houston. It's what we need now. We need to reconnect with our humanity as a nexus to the whole of the natural world. And that evokes love. Love evokes wholeness, and wholeness evokes love. So that's part of what I was doing. But it really, I have to say that this book, I do feel like it's my best work, but I also feel like I am only the author by default. Really, the original author is nature. You know, I mean, look at the way the book came about.
Yeah.
I had to be told to write it. So I just was accepting the assignment. That's my role. I accepted the assignment. But even in accepting the assignment, I was channeling something, a message that needed to come through. And it's an important message because love is so important. It is the most powerful force in the cosmos, I believe. It can overcome hate. It can overcome division. And it needs to be we need to become more aware of the omnipresent, ubiquitous presence of love that surrounds and enfolds us, really from the time we're born until the time, even after we die, or at least according to some, that's when we go back into a place of love. And so that's what Paul Callahan said, a Warimi Aboriginal elder from New South Wales, Australia, and I quote him in the book. You know, we're born in love, we're surrounded by love, and when we die, we go back to the spirit world, which is another place of love.
Well, it's really interesting. There's so much to unpack here. And yeah, I like to go back to how the founding fathers of this country adopted so many of the structures of the Iroquois nation, but they failed to adopt the Council of Grandmothers. And so we've been
Mm,
operating, let's say, on half of our wisdom or less, since our inception. And here we have technology as the new god. As we've so-called civilization has deplatformed spirit or relegated it to a minor role, just kind of somewhere between an illusion and superstition. Earlier
right.
prior to the call, we talked about Darwin and how even Darwin was misinterpreted by the materialists as social Darwinism, which preceded Darwinism. So here we are in the midst of a mainstream civilization, which it'll pay homage to the native peoples because it's politically correct to do that, but it will not essentially re-platform nature in a way that you're suggesting. So we're in the midst of, I mean, what you're presenting is not unlike so many other things that I've seen, many languages. My colleague Richard Flyer calls them islands of coherence. And these islands of
Mm.
coherence have not yet been woven together. And I helped Leonard Laskow write his book on forgiving love. He wrote a book called Healing with Love. And Bruce Lipton and I quoted him in Spontaneous Evolution, where we talked about love as the actual guiding principle of the universe, that it is an infrastructure of the universe. Now, that's an abstraction. And yet as Callahan pointed out, we see love from the minute we're born until the minute we die and then beyond. How do we deal with this dichotomy, this split between the ideal and the real deal?
Wow. Wow, you just opened up
in
so much stuff, so much. Okay, let me see if I can even
in
recall all the
20
things. And I'm
words or less.
okay, okay. Well, first of all, thank you. That was rich. And I should tell your listeners or your viewers that I had an epiphany when I was writing this book, which you alluded to, which is that I realized that I had been studying indigenous wisdom. I've been blessed, I've been really blessed. My first mentor was Dan Moonhawk Alford. He was teaching a class called Anthropological Linguistics at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. This was 1983. And he described himself as standing at the lonely intersection of language, consciousness, quantum physics, and Native America. Moonhawk himself was only part Osage and Cherokee, but the dominant part in his heart was very much Native, and he was deeply accepted by Native America. And Moonhawk liked to tell the story about that when he was a child, he was taken to his father's workplace. His father was a longshoresman, and he was working on the California coast among the tall redwood trees. And they spent the morning on a jitney stacking up logs, and that was good fun for a boy. And then they took their lunch break, and they were overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And that was the first time Moonhawk had ever seen the ocean. So he says to his father, "Dad, that sure is a lot of water out there." And his father says, "Yep, and that's just the top of it." Okay, so so Munich liked to tell that story because he wanted to make the point about how deep indigenous wisdom was. And so it's steeped in wisdom. So you, and I feel the same about indigenous wisdom, but I also feel that about love. So the epiphany I had when I was writing this book, actually, which goes to what you were talking about with the council, the original in the founding of the United States, they left out the Women's Council. They left out the Women's Council, which is really the Wisdom Council. They're the Wisdom Council. And that's really true in Native America in general. So leaving out the Wisdom Council, I realized that almost everything I've been studying about indigenous wisdom could also be called feminine wisdom, deep, original, feminine wisdom. So that was my epiphany. It's not just indigenous wisdom that needs to come back. It's also feminine wisdom. And I'm a man, but I have a feminine side, and I've been blessed to study with and be inspired by very wise women in my life. And I would agree even with Joseph Campbell. I don't always agree with Joseph Campbell because I think he's emphasizing the masculine too much, but he did recognize that women's wisdom was very whole and very deep, and that and complete. And that's what I really feel. So that's an important aspect of the book. Now, you asked about islands of coherence, and you also brought up technology being the new god. I think that I've said enough probably, but I think that coherence was a very important word in my life because it was a very important word for David Bohm. And even though I never met David Bohm personally, I came to know so many people that did know Bohm personally, including Lee Nickel, his editor, Leroy Little Bear, who moderated a dialogue in 1992 that brought David Bohm together. In the last year of his life, Bohm was blessed to be part of this dialogue between indigenous elders and Western scientists, primarily physicists, also David Peat, and others. And Bohm really, really was just transported into this most amazing place in that dialogue circle of 1992. And he danced. I mean, according to David Peat, who wrote a biography of him, he wasn't the most in his body kind of guy, but he danced. He danced because he was so excited, ecstatic even, because he realized his dream, and because he knew that inside an atom there was only process and relationship. He knew, Bohm, that inside an atom the English language was inadequate for describing this because our English language is top heavy with nouns. But native languages are not like that at all. So he had this great awakening when he was in the dialogue circle. And Bohm always spoke about islands of coherence, because if you can be coherent, that is the way out of fragmentation. And Bohm also said that fragmented thinking causes a fragmented society. And I think he's really correct about that. Okay, that was a long answer, but you brought out so much
That
stuff.
was a
So
long
you
question.
yeah,
That was a very
yeah.
rich answer because, again, in
Thank you.
working with Richard Flyer on his
Mm.
book, Birthing the Symbiotic Age, which is very much in parallel to what you're talking about, he quotes Ilya Prigozhin as using the islands of coherence. So clearly, that entire gang of physicists were beginning to reach for the same indigenous wisdom that
Yeah.
you're talking about. And so coherence is really key at this point because if we look at one of the points that Richard points out in his book is that these islands of coherence are not in coherent communication with one another. So there's internal coherence, maybe inside of a group, who all are on the same page. But the next level is a larger coherence. And my jokey way of saying is where the 90% of us who are not sociopaths can agree on a system of being, on a way of being. But we can't
Mm.
because the sociopathogens, as we call them, the sociopathogens are quite coherent in what they're doing. They've got a plan, they've got all the money, they've got all the guns, and so on. And so they own that battlefield. So every time we go on that battlefield, we're basically working for them. So what you're talking about, and what I think most of the most exciting original work right now is about, is creating a new playing field where that loving coherence um, gets expressed, and people recognize it above and beyond the religious um, designations that have kept us separate
Mm.
on the
You know,
battlefield.
I think one of the main reasons I'm drawn to speaking about love today is I feel in my heart that it's love will be the best motivator. So, for instance, it does almost break my heart when I sit back and try to see how much of the ecology has been damaged in my own lifetime, particularly water. Water more than anything else. When I was a child, I went to the High Pyrenees in Spain as a teenager. My ethnic background is Basque. I'm 25% Basque from the High Pyrenees of Spain. I'm 25% Aragon Spanish, and I'm 50% Jewish. So I'm all tribal in a way. I'm all tribal, but when I went to the High Pyrenees of Spain, we would stop and drink the agua fresca, and that was a way of life. It was pre-water bottles. It was pre-water bottles. But people were drinking agua fresca. They would stop, and it was like a sacred moment, too, a very sacred moment. So, why did that shift? That breaks my heart, but I think that the way out of it is through love. So when you realize, when you come completely aware of how, for one thing, that we are the elements, we are light, air, water, and earth. Then we're not going to want to drill through water for oil, because we'll realize how precious, how much love is associated with everything, including love. I mean, water is associated with everything, including love. We have a heart that's all water. Our eyes are very watery. Our bodies are in the same proximity of, or same approximate amount of water as the oceans that cover the earth, about 70%. I always hear different things about it. People say 70%, 80%, I don't know, but it's about 70%. And so we need to come into relationship with the elements. This is something I learned from Native America. Why do we say a prayer and make an offering? Because it's about relationship. We're not simply just praying for something we want. We're actually praying out of blessing, praying out of wholeness. And that really is the key.
Well, you're right about love and relationship. I think that relationship's the key. And then I keep returning to Richard Slayer's book because that's what I was helping him write for the last 3 years. And
Wow.
it really is the symbiotic networks he talks about that weave together these islands of coherence, these circles of trust. It's all about relationship. And in our Western society, our mentally based society, we tend to look at ideas as being prime. So if you got a great idea, that's going to be the material solution to what we're up against, when really it's relationship. Bringing people together. My jokey way of saying it is we need to move past the tug of war that's pulling us apart and create a tug of peace where we're all pulling together in the same direction. And the
Yeah.
identity
Yeah.
issues become the identical issues that we all face. You were talking about nature being compromised. I mean, water, the more you read about the state of water on the planet, the more you realize that, yeah, we're dying of thirst, so to speak.
Well, well, we are, but also the same water that's been here since time immemorial is still circulating on the planet. The same air that's been here since time immemorial is circulating on the planet. So we breathe in the same air that our ancestors did. We drink the same water our ancestors did. We stand upon the same earth that our ancestors did. And we feel the same warmth. We receive just the right amount of light, warmth, and energy from the sun that's 93 million miles away that our ancestors did. So I still want to begin from gratitude. I'm grateful for that. That hasn't changed. What has changed is that fresh water is being despoiled, and there's some nefarious plans for how to monetize that. That's kind of scary. But I think that if we operate from love, we're not going to operate from, it's very the opposite of operating from greed in a way, but actually love love doesn't really have an opposite. So it kind of so we have to be compassionate and even accepting of those that seem to be trying to monetize, trying to operate out of greed and whatnot, because they're human too, and in fact they're very human, and they're very because humanity includes our flaws, so they're very human, and so we need to accept them as well. And somehow, by accepting, transform them. That I'm still working on. And I'm at a disadvantage in that I don't know this book that you've been working on for 3 years. So, but I do agree. Let me just say this. In my own personal evolution, thought was super important to me at first. So I studied psychology. I studied psychology in undergraduate school, even though I had the misfortune of going to a school that was into behaviorism. So I had to go find another school. I didn't actually transfer, but I did a partnership with Duquesne University when I was going to Allegheny College of Meadville, Pennsylvania, which was very into Skinnerian behaviorism.
Yeah.
So I was looking at existential psychology. Then I went to California Institute of Integral Studies to study East-West psychology. So it's still psychology, but this East-West psychology is sometimes almost thought of as religion. You know, Buddhism is a way of life. You know, it's Hinduism is also can be a way of life. But I was expanding that way, but I think that when I wrote the book Original Politics, I was working on a transfer between thought and action. And there is a seamless connection between thought and action, just like the Upanishads said about, watch your thoughts because they become words. Watch your words because they become actions. Watch your actions because they become your character. Watch your character because it becomes your destiny. So I think there is this seamless connection between thought and action. And the same thing is true with love. The only difference here is maybe if you have a loving presence first, your thoughts are going to be more coherent, actually, because they're going to bring things together. Your actions are also going to be more coherent and more thoughtful for in terms of the greater good. And when I say the greater good, I mean for all humanity and all our relations. I do not mean the Socratic idea that's just for the greater good for humans. That's going down the wrong path, I would say. So yeah. So did you see how those are all connected together?
Well, what I'm seeing, of course, is that there is such a thing as wisdom, which has been superseded by knowledge. And so when you're talking about indigenous wisdom, you're talking about the Upanishads, you're talking about Buddhism, you're talking about Western philosophy, Christianity, and so on. Essentially, there is this core of wisdom and love. You know, what you said about our thoughts and our words becoming our deeds. This is part of our human legacy. And in what's been happening in our society, I call it the flattening of history, and I'm generalizing here, about that in many institutions of higher education, a lot of that wisdom has been forsaken for political correctness and a woke ideology, which bastardizes the essence of our relationships by forcing us to use certain language as if using that language is going to create that loving essence in our heart, which seems to be the opposite. So, in this world that
Yeah.
we're in right now, how do we bring forth? I'm asking this not as a theoretical, but a practical question. How do we bring forth this love that so many people know is at the core of our existence? How do we bring it forth in a way that is going to actually have an impact in the world at this time?
Mm. That's a very important question. Uh, I think the most important thing is to prioritize love and wisdom. And how do we do that is complex. We're doing something quite contrary to it now with artificial intelligence. Okay. And it reminds me of the road we went on before when we were creating the atomic weapon. Because some of those scientists started to get an inkling before the atomic bomb was exploded. Certainly Oppenheimer and Einstein, got an inkling of what they had wrought. And of course, famously, Oppenheimer quotes the Bhagavad Gita, I've become death, the destroyer of worlds. That's an example of what the Swiss philosopher Jean Gebser would say is the deficient rational mind. So there was an efficient mental state where if you think about the ancient Greeks, they were actually a good example of understanding that truth and beauty and science were all interconnected and the word science existed back then. The word scientist didn't come about till the 19th century. That's another story. But that's why those ancients were known as natural philosophers. So they were the ones that were interested in beauty, harmony, like we've been speaking about here today. Um, you know, that is, it seems to me, super, super important priority because I see with artificial intelligence is prioritizing knowledge over wisdom and even confusing the two. So there's this idea that if we accumulate enough knowledge, then we will become wise. Knowledge has nothing to do with wisdom. Absolutely nothing to do with it. It seems to me, anyway, that the people that I would consider wise are the people who are most in tune with the iterative cycles of nature, and they're also they are resonating with a certain frequency that understands how nature is unfolding. And that's why they can bring forth ideas which are appropriate for this time. And that's why wisdom is timeless. Love, it also is timeless. That's why the subtitle of Original Love is the timeless source of wholeness. So all those things are really important. When you're talking about, woke ideology and things like that, those are well intentioned attempts by people who may be of kind heart, maybe not, but they typically are, they have good intentions, but what they're doing is actually a little bit onerous and a little bit strangulating of creativity, and that is a problem. It's a big problem. So I'm with you there. Um, I just, they need to get to a deeper place where love is actually really what is directing action, and then they'll be more accepting. I mean, if that makes any sense. So thank you.
When you when you look at what Wikipedia has to say about people like Bruce Lipton and Rupert Sheldrake,
Oh
they're
yeah.
turned into hucksters and scoundrels who don't understand science, which is I'm over exaggerating, of course, but has replaced religion. So in mainstream culture, in the New York Times world, in the world of CNN, et cetera, religion may be tolerated, but the genuine religion is scientific materialism, which actually wants to find a material solution bypassing the original wisdom that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, I'm aware that Wikipedia, and I send them a little bit of money because I honor what they do in general, but I am disturbed by the way they treat people I would consider true scientists who are truly open-minded, who are interested in the pursuit of truth. And the two people you mentioned, Bruce Lipton and Rupert Sheldrake, are very much like that. So they conduct true experiments without presuming to, what usually happens in science, and this came up in a seed dialogue once. It was hysterically funny. There was a fellow named Phil Sakimoto. I haven't spoken to him in years, but he was an astrophysicist, and people were talking about the scientific method. And he said, you should all realize something. The scientific method, as normally written about, is only practiced by like sixth grade science teachers. It is not practiced by any science teachers. Only a sixth grade science teacher would say, for instance, let's experiment by putting a plant in a dark closet and seeing how it does compared to putting a plant by a windowsill. So actually, that's just an act of complete cruelty. That's killing the plant that they put in the closet. So what Phil said is that what really happens in the scientific world is that people get an intuition. They get an intuition. They get a flash of epiphany and understanding, and then they may design an experiment to prove what they already thought of. So that is. It's not necessarily wrong if their epiphany was really true. It may further knowledge, but the rare person, the Sheldrakes of the world, and Bruce Liptons of the world are very open-minded. They're so open-minded that they're really designing experiments where they don't know the answer, and I really relate to that and really honor that. In fact, when I lead dialogues, and I lead dialogues a lot these days, that's the way I prefer to teach. And if I do workshops or if I teach for an institution, I'll do it dialogically, but I'll ask questions where I don't know the answers. Same thing happens in St. John's College in Santa Fe, and it's also, I think, in Maryland, someplace, the same institution. Their tutors, they call them tutors instead of professors, they may ask questions where they don't know the answers. And that's the best. It was Krishnamurti who said the only questions worth asking are the ones that are impossible to answer. Now, it might sound silly, but it's really an important idea because I think it's true, because really it's in the open-minded pursuit of knowledge and pursuit of wisdom, really, that we become a conduit to wisdom. And that's a beautiful thing. It really is a beautiful thing. Thank you. This is so enjoyable. I'm really having a great
I'm having
time.
fun too. You raised a question for me that my question is, in the process of writing this book, was there uh, an epiphany, a discovery, and so on that you wouldn't have gotten without writing this book? Is there something that came to
Oh,
you?
tons, tons,
I figured as
tons.
much, but yeah, one or two or three
Everything.
things that, yeah, something that's
Yeah, yeah.
in particular.
Well, in any book I've written, even before this, when I wrote Original Politics, people gave me too much credit for the research because they don't actually know how I work. And I don't want to reveal too many secrets, but it's really more prayer. It's I work in prayer and the out of that information flows in more than meticulous, onerous research. Or I didn't send if I was Doris Kearns Goodwin or something, I have like 8 students or something working on the research on the side or something. And no, I don't really operate that way. But so one of the first things that came in with Original Love, I went to see a friend of mine, Michelle Ratzbitsky, who lives in Santa Fe, and we did what you might call even a kind of a reading about the book in the future. And one of the things that came through was something that was said by Mongolian shamans that the last 21,000 years could be divided into an era of Earth, first like being in the womb of Mother Earth, then an era of sky or spiritually enlightened societies, followed by an era of man, which is about scientific innovation, brilliant minds, but scientific innovation seeking mastery over nature. And that the coming era, the Mongolian shamans say, would be a return, it's really return to the feminine wisdom of women. And that this would rekindle our relationship between our bodies and the cosmos. So women were first understood to be the wisdom keepers because the female body has obviously a connection to the moon. The menstrual cycles are aligned with the moon, especially then. They were closely aligned with the moon. And that's why the word I was shocked to come across in my research. And again, this research is more like it's prayer and then it just comes. But I saw that the Sanskrit word ritu is the origin of the English word ritual, and it means menses. So
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't prove, perhaps, but it gives me a very good indication that the first ceremonies were around a women's body connection to the moon, and by extension to the cosmos. So yeah. So that was huge. That I think that led to the epiphany I said before about how connected indigenous wisdom and original feminine wisdom are. And those 4 Mongolian eras, and by the way, I should say, I believe the era of woman, the coming era of woman, should be an era of partnership, like Rian Eisler says, not just simply a flip side of the era of man. And it shouldn't be about women enslaving men, or women in any way depreciating men. Because the masculine impulse for initiation, exploration, and you have to be careful with these things, what's masculine and feminine, but what's usually considered the masculine impulse for initiation and creativity in that way is necessary. It's necessary. Just like, when you're talking about politics, you need liberals and conservatives because the initiation for progress is part of nature, but also part of nature is conserving. So we need balance. We always need balance. So yeah, it was just everything came out of that. And I should say one more thing too, because I am the president of the Gene Gaebser Society, not because I'm the best Gaebser scholar. In fact, I'm not even close to that. There's Gaebser scholars that know so much more than me that can practically quote from the ever-present origin book, which Gaebser wrote. It was produced in 1949 and 1953. Came out in two parts, I think, and then it became one thing that wasn't translated into English until 1985. So cats like um, uh, Ken Wilber read the original German as Ursprung Gegenwart or something like that. Read the original German, so it got a head start in forming his philosophy. But Gaebser is important to the book too because he talks about stages from the archaic to the magical to the mythical to the mental and to the integral. So these
Hmm.
correlate pretty closely to what the Mongolian shamans say. Because for Gaebser, the archaic would be where there's no separation between ourselves and Mother Earth. And that's the way I begin the book, which was really kind of channeled and downloaded. Imagine yourself, floating in a world, being fed without moving a muscle. This is how I begin the book because nourishment is everywhere. Your eyes are not yet open, but you feel peace, deep, abiding peace. More than peace, love, original love. There's love, surrounding you, enfolding you. This is the archaic idea. This is when there is no separation at all. But for whatever reason, we moved away from that. So we went from archaic. But I should say this. This is the most important thought Gebser has put out. We move away from it in terms of the predominant mode of consciousness shifts, but we never lose what came before. So the archaic mode of consciousness, love, when if you have an experience of total interconnectedness of love, that's real. That's real, very real. And but we did shift a little bit to first a magical way of being and then a mental way of being. I'm sorry, then a mythical way of being where stories are predominant. But all of these ways of being in the world are still with us. And that's why the archaic mode, when we can be one with everything, is so beautiful. That's why the magical mode, when our will becomes indistinguishable from universal will, is so beautiful. And it's also why we are so enchanted by stories, great stories like Psyche and Eros. So all of those things preceded the mental way of seeing. And then, as I mentioned before, we're unfortunately in the downside. Well, it's not unfortunate. It just is what it is. We're in the deficient rational now. But that's only a prelude to something beautiful happening, what Gebser calls the integral, which other people have called, also including Sri Aurobindo. And that's a beautiful state of oneness where you are able to retain all the wisdom that came before. And Native people understood this too, because I told the story of William Commanda in the Seventh Fire Prophecy, and he talks about there will come a time when a people will emerge which will go back and retrieve the wisdom that's been left by the side of the trail.
Hmm.
And I think
Wow.
that is what our mission is. That is what our mission is in this time, is to retrieve all the wisdom that's been left by the side of the trail, and then we apply it to the seemingly intractable problems of today, and they won't be intractable anymore. They will go away. I'm sorry, I said a lot, but that
No,
was
no,
a
this is what
okay.
I wanted to
Uh,
hear, because
okay.
really what it is, it's retrieving the wisdom by the side that's been left by the side of the road. And of course,
Yeah.
we've had two consecutive paradigms: uh, the patriarchal religion paradigm and the scientific material paradigm, both of which have discounted feminine wisdom and have sought to dominate nature. And so we're at the point now where we're understanding how that doesn't work. And then, like in all recovery programs, you got to hit bottom. Somebody asked the Swami recently, are we out of the Kali Yuga yet? And somebody says, well, actually, we're on the cusp. We're at the border Kali Yuga, right?
Yeah, I
The
think
age of
that's
nefarious is still
yeah,
with
yeah.
us.
That's a really hard one, this idea, but I agree with you. I think and so did Gebser. He said, you needed to have this entropy, this falling apart of a certain mode of consciousness before a new one could be born. And so I think it's already here. The integral way of thought, of being in the world, of politics, what is already here. But I mean, some people like Sri Aurobindo pronounced that in the 1920s, and this it's here, it's now. Other seers feel that it's going to happen. It is here already, but this birth is not easy. It's really not easy. And the people that are, you mentioned the patriarchal era and the scientific era. Yeah, I would say they're very closely pretty much the same thing, really. So it's just that we tend to separate them, but they're both uh, seeing the world in a similar way. And we I certainly welcome when the time comes when we do retrieve the wisdom from the side of the trail, and we do begin to honor women again in the fullness of their wisdom, and the same for indigenous peoples. It is happening. It's happening. I mean, we had in the 1970s, we had the advent at the same time of women's studies programs and and native studies programs. They both started in the 1970s. Yeah, there's pushback right now to try to eliminate them. We don't want DEI, but you know what? When anybody says to me anything negative about DEI, I say, you mean diversity, equity, and inclusion? You're against diversity? Are you against diversity? Are you against equity? Are you against inclusion? Because at least in the heart of it, yes, maybe some of it is deteriorated into some PC wokeness, but the heart of the words are actually very, very good.
There was a brilliant piece that was written after Trump got elected in 2016. I went into a dark night and then an inquiry of, what's the deeper story? And Otto Scharmer, you may know Otto Scharmer at
Yeah,
MIT Presencing Institute, he said that when a civilization is in decline, right, um, there are three ways to go. You can move forward together. You could fall backward into something that seemed to have worked in the past, or you can stick with the status quo. In 2016, the Move Forward candidate, unfortunately, Bernie Sanders, was the best representative of Move Forward Together at that time. He was deplatformed and replaced by Hillary, who represented not progressivism but the status quo. She was the status quo at that point. She represented, uh, that, the, you know, the neoliberalism, with kind of a inclusiveness facade, but basically it was still about the same predatory society with making a few fixes along the fringes. But Trump represented the falling back into a previous way. So this devolution that you just described, where people don't talk about, well, actually, why don't we want to be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive? Uh, there's been so much of a reaction against the imposition, and there hasn't been any from a core and central sacred center. There hasn't been a sacred center to move forward that partnership society that you mentioned earlier that Rian Eisler talked about. That's really the epitome of feminine wisdom. Um,
Mm,
so, so we're at a point where these ideological battles, that battlefield, is destroying our commonly sensed common sense. So
mm,
your that wisdom left by the side of the trail, that's our commonly sensed common sense that has been abandoned essentially or
okay.
temporarily. So um, to wrap this up, I want to ask a question because, again, this is called Signs of the Upwising. It's a podcast. So
Mm.
I want to see signals that this awakening is taking place. So in the course of writing the book or in the course of having people respond to the book in your life right now, what to you are the most promising avenues, things that you've seen that are indicators, that are pathways forward, that are signs that the upwising is indeed happening and that there are trails that are heading to pick up that wisdom on the side of the trail?
Mm. Well, um, I want to respond a little bit about Hillary.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. Well,
I think it's a little unfair to just simply say that she represented the status quo, although I would say that was very effectively used against her. And that is probably the reason why she lost the Electoral College. She actually received way more, millions more votes, but um, because she is a woman, and she would have been the first president who was a woman in the United States. So I'm not sure you could say that's the status quo, but I think that was used against her very effectively.
right.
You know, it is true that Hillary represented kind of the last bastion of what I would say women leaders who were not completely comfortable in their own skin, not completely comfortable in their own skin, because in order to succeed in a so-called man's world of politics, they had to make certain adjustments. So you saw this happening with leaders in the 20th century in particular, from Margaret Thatcher to Indira Gandhi to, they were said to be strong women leaders, but they often were somewhat warlike, in the way they came out. So they had a masculinized aspect of themselves, which they probably felt they needed in order to succeed. So, but what happened with Hillary losing the election? Remember, immediately after Donald Trump becomes president, there is the Women's March, which becomes the largest movement in history. It was later exceeded by Black Lives Matter, but at that time, it was the largest worldwide movement in history. And more women started to run for office, and more women of different kinds started to win office. So we had two Native American congresswomen. One, Deb Haaland, ends up later becoming the Secretary of the Interior under Biden. So there's a tremendous, I think there is a resurgence of feminine wisdom that is coming forward. And I would cautiously give Hillary Clinton a little bit more credit for being in that mix, but she also represented a kind of limited way of being the feminine. And I think that that is starting to shift. It's starting to change. So there are women that ran for office with that won with, you know, like having piercings and tattoos and things like that. So things that Hillary Clinton would never have dreamed of doing, right? So that's what I mean.
Well, you
Am I
reminded
running
me
over
of
time?
no, no,
Yeah,
no. There's
sorry.
no time.
Okay.
Time is an
There's
illusion,
no
like the
time.
Native American, like
Oh,
any Native
good.
American, you know that. So, so you brought up something earlier. You brought up Jean Houston earlier. Well, in
Yeah.
1994, I got a call from Jean Houston, and she said, "You
Wow.
can't tell anybody this, but I'm in the White House. I'm working with Hillary Clinton, who wants
Yeah.
to access the spirit of Eleanor Roosevelt."
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that, of course, that came out as a horror. That was the worst thing that ever happened to Gene Houston. We live in Ashland, Oregon now, which is where Gene has been. We'd see her
Oh.
at the Unity Church every week up until, about 2 months
Oh.
before she passed. And I've
Oh.
known Gene
Wow.
for, many, many years. But um,
Wow.
what happened then was that Gene was, uh, all of her academic credentials were destroyed by that article that appeared in People magazine, Psychic in the White House. And
Mm.
and for her part, you know, Hillary kind of washed her hands of that of Jean at that point too. So, um,
Right.
but you can see, as you were pointing out, that she was reaching for something that was deeper and that
Yeah.
might have got squelched by the essential meanness of politics. Marianne Williamson is
Yeah.
another one who's
Yeah.
spoken to us about how poorly she was treated both times she ran. So there's an essential meanness in that system that hasn't been addressed. So I appreciate your disclaimer about that. So,
Yeah.
so anything that you want to say to wrap this up that you want to leave people with, and we're going to, of course, um, put your book up on there, and they can obviously order it. Um, yeah, I've enjoyed what I've read, and I just see the depth of wisdom in it, in
Thank
how
you.
much your life's work has brought you to. This universal power of love. What else can I say?
Mm.
So, is there
Mm.
something that you want to add that maybe
Yeah.
we haven't touched on that you want to punctuate?
Yeah. Um, I would add that the fourth part of the book is called the undivided presence of original love.
Yeah,
So, I start with love and wholeness. I go to separation from the whole. That's part two. Part three is love in modern times. Part four is the undivided presence of original love. I think it's there where I had another epiphany, which is the kind of thing that happens when you're writing and immersed in writing this kind of book. And I began to realize how I could just go within and I can feel whole, and that there's nothing that needs to be done. There's nothing that needs to be done. There's nothing that needs to be corrected in a way. It's a state of kind of infinite patience. And some of the wisest people I've enjoyed their company of, like grandfather Leon Secatero, were like this. His own children told me he was a Dene, Canyoncito Band of Navajo headman and elder. His own children told me that he never got angry with them. It's hard for me to even imagine having a
yeah,
father who never got angry. It's amazing. But Leon taught me a lot about patience. So he understood, like, let's say somebody got angry in front of him. He would wait until that time passed. He would just wait, and then the energy shifts. So I think that really part of our task before us, in coming into a more loving place, is to slow down, is to be patient, is to is to be present, be fully present. And that's really what love is. So, you know, so many times when a loved one is ill or a loved one is dying or whatever it is, the key to healing that person is being fully present. That's not easy today. Look, people are so addicted to their phones, they have all these distractions going on all the time. But when we are fully present, magic happens. It's so beautiful. And even when we suffer loss of death, all that does is bring us into awareness of how much we've loved, how much we've loved. And that's why we feel a sense of loss. So all of this comes together, and the future is bright. We are changing. Our consciousness is shifting. It is changing. And when it becomes so mainstream, you know, books like Dan Brown's book that just came out, The Secret of Secrets. Hey, here's stuff that I've been studying, you've been studying for the last 40, 50 years, whatever. All of a sudden now it's in the mainstream, the idea of non-local consciousness, that death is not the end. It's coming into the mainstream. When this becomes in the mainstream, then we become more loving, we become less fearful. Because fear is associated with a lot of greed and other things that we do to try to protect ourselves. If we're not fearful, then, and the core fear, or the original wound, maybe is even death, when we get over that and we realize it's not the end, then I think some incredible things are going to unfold. And I'm very optimistic. I think that we will make it through this, and we will survive, and we will eventually thrive. Right now, we're in a tough time, and it's not going to be resolved during our lifetimes, but we're at least seeing the beginning of the shift. And all we can do is water the seeds we want to see grow in the world and give them the light, the air, and the fertile soil to grow. And that's what I seek to do. And thank you for, if these words today contribute in any way to that, wonderful. And I think they did. And I really honor your work, what you're doing. Mr. Swami Beyondananda, thank you very much. Thank you for your sense of humor, because we need humor to get through the day. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. That was the perfect way to end because, again, you're bringing nature back into the picture. You're bringing
Mm,
air and water and soil back,
mm.
and you're reminding us that that's the fundamental connection. So, thank you, Glenn Aparicio Parry. Original love. May it live long and prosper, and may the farce be with us all. This is Steve Behrman. Thank you so much for tuning in to Signs of the Upwising. Till next time.